And we are live. What's up, guys? Yeah, we already have some people saying hi in here. What's up? We're back with another installment. Hey, we are back with another installment. Hold on, let me get live on Instagram because I figured out how to do that this time. So we're actually live on Instagram now as well. But yeah, hey guys, welcome to another installment of Civil Offense. My name is Ahmed Mlih, and today we are talking about, well, you know, an important topic, because this is whether objectivism is compatible with libertarianism, especially, you know, with, I mean, Zulu is the one that's been promoting a lot of it within sort of like that mixture between that and ANCAP or anarcho-capitalism. And so, you know, thinking that this is becoming more popular in the movement, I thought it would be good to actually have a discussion full on, because even when I was first talking with Esso, even on the first stream we did, he was mentioning sort of objectivism and whether or not it's actually like taking properly from Aristotelianism. So basically, you know, now we have you know, a couple people in here to talk about it. I'll get to you real quick, Esso. We'll let you make a statement real quick. But now,
sorry.
Yeah, real quick. I just need to get through this.
Go ahead.
But yeah, I just need to say that we are making civil offense history, or should I say herstory, with our first ever woman guest, Sue, aka this is Sue, who I'd say is the reincarnation of Rand herself, but like Rand, she rejects mysticism and the supernatural. But she's here with us today, making the case in favor of objectivism being compatible with libertarianism. She is a rational anarchist who is interested in philosophy, economics, and history. And it should also be noted that she refused to have herself introduced with her academic credentials. You're welcome. You can follow her at @thisissue_. How are you, Sue?
Hey, I'm doing great. Wow, that was some great entrance. This is a big moment for the feminist movement to be in the first one.
Unfortunately, women aren't real.
I got caught. Everyone knows I'm a federal agent.
Yeah. Okay. So we have, look, you know, look, while I would say that this show isn't man enough anymore or artistic enough anymore, we do have a man who loves other men and can carry the weight for the autism energy being lost by having a femoid on the show.
I'd use the term man. I'd use the term man loosely.
We have, there we go. Already off to a great start. We have another, we have none other than the entity himself, Eso of Backalley Philosophy, and he's back to make the case against objectivism's compatibility with libertarianism. How are you this evening, Eso?
Yeah, what's up? Just keeping y'all company on Prison Planet again, this time on Instagram as well. Population me and anybody else that feels exactly the same.
We're on Twitter too.
I'm not really, I mean, I suppose that I am going to be invested in this conversation, but I'm just going to make an upfront disclaimer. I'm treating this more as just a discourse exercise, because I sort of haven't been interacting with anybody in the last 2 or 3 months. I'm just kind of here to have a good time, but also to sort of like discuss some of the things that us in the back alley have been quietly studying over the last like year and a half, 2 years, because around mid 2022, it's sort of quietly over there, our groups became less of a philosophical, ideological movement and became more of a study group, because we identified the nature of the state to the point where we could base a movement around you know, specifically deconstructing it in society. Basically, we're developing a method that would be, I think, at the very least, is at how I would advertise it. Well, depending on whether or not it lands, that will that waits to be seen. But what I'm hoping it will accomplish is it will be the book that the anarchist cookbook wishes it was. That I'm in the process of writing that, basically. And as a result, a lot of the claims that people that have been coming out of the back alley have been making have taken a lot of influence from obscure philosophy like Jacques Ellul or Wittgenstein, and cite these concepts in libertarianism as a methodology or to justify why it is a methodology in a way that's not exactly conventional in discourse. And well, I guess what I'm getting at is I'm sorry that I've been sort of snippy at people over the last 3 or 4 years, because I that was largely just out of frustration of trying to convey what I now understand is something new that I have to establish in discourse around these topics, and I've just been kind of expecting people to get it and not realizing other people don't. I'm sincerely sorry about how I reacted to that, but yeah, conversations like this are, I guess, me just seeing how to approach these topics, exercising.
All right. So just a few announcements for today before we get into this. Go to ahmedmlih.com and sign up for my email list for the latest updates. Unfortunately, I still have yet to update that. I really mentioned that last stream that I was going to. I really have to get back on that. But if you do, I will start doing that, and I can confirm that now that I will get back on it. But if you DM me at anarcho-nitrain on Discord, I can go ahead and see if you are worthy. No, but just to make sure like nobody coming in is like a troll or anything. But we can get you in on the Discord server. There's all the updates there. I'm always announcing what the next stream is there, and I do so on Twitter as well. I mean, you can find me at Civil Offense. I'm doing that as well nowadays. But yeah, I am basically we are also live on Twitter right now, Instagram, Rumble, YouTube, but we're also on Amazon, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And this stream, like all the rest of them, will be uploaded to those within the day. But yeah, so basically we're getting into this now. Time for today actually permits for about 90 minutes of conversation. I'm going to time it and make sure we can get to as much as we can. But if somebody's making a point at the end, we're not going to just like cut you off immediately and say, okay, stop. We're just going to more say it. So like, wrap it up. And then, but after that, we'll get to, basically just like the sort of like closing statements, any sort of questions about this like that people have. And also you can put your questions down in the live chat. I'll try to get to those and filter through. But if not, if you are on the Discord server, you can go to the episode discussion channel. And if you ask a question there, I will prioritize that over the people in the live chat, just because, those are the homies. But pretty much, if you do it somewhere else in the Discord server, it might be hard for me to find. So just make sure you're doing it specifically there. But let's see. So once I've asked the initial questions relevant to the topic that I'm going to ask you guys, you'll both be given time to answer them. Essentially, just give each other time. We're going to start with Sude and then go to Esso on this because, we just want to have the case made for it and then sort of the criticism of it afterward. But basically, it'll just be mostly you guys for the rest of the 90 minutes. I'll make sure I'll hop in if there's any sort of interruptions like between each other, like excessively, or if there's any sort of, just if the argument is just completely going in circles, going nowhere, and we're just not going to resolve it, with you two, then I'll hop in for that. But yeah, basically after the 90 minutes, you'll both be given time to make your closing statements. If you wish, you can say whatever you want. It doesn't even have to be about this, but yeah, you probably should if you want to represent yourself nicely. But yeah, so that's pretty much everything out of the way. With that being said, there are two definitions that are relevant to this discussion, which I let you both know about beforehand. But the things that are relevant to this are the actual definitions of objectivism and libertarianism. And I did want you guys to each define those, just because if we don't, then we're just going to be talking past each other here. And pretty much it's going to lead to a sort of unproductive discussion. So as long as, those things can be discussed. And even so, like if you guys have problems with each other's definitions, those can be discussed further into the 90 minutes or even, right away. But pretty much I'm just going to let you on both to give those definitions, like, in your opening statements each. But then, obviously, it'll be discussing the actual main topic of the show, which is, is objectivism compatible with libertarianism? Why not? But yeah, with that being said, I suppose we'll... Sorry?
Yeah, this is important because this is one of the things I just wanted to establish as well. And this is sort of, I guess, in previous discussions I've attempted to have about this topic, it's not exactly been established very clearly why this is important. I am explicitly in what I'm claiming about the nature of the state and societies. I'm explicitly making competing claims about what these concepts are to how they would be described in the classic Aristotelian method, following the Socratic method and expanding upon it. And I have an explicit internal reason for this, as far as how I would characterize Aristotelian metaphysics. But Yeah, that's basically one of the points we need to establish. Is I'm not attempting to defend a political system. I'm attempting to defend a theory of society in this conversation. So I'm treating libertarianism as a methodology and not a political ideology. And I intend on elaborating as to why.
So we'll get to Sude with her opening statements. I guess, keep what he said in mind since that's something he wanted to make clear from the start. But yeah, I'll turn it over to you, Sue.
Yeah, so I first would like to clarify what objectivism is in case there are viewers here that aren't aware of what objectivism is. To give a very quick summarization, it's just, objectivism is a philosophical system that is a claim that it bases itself on reality and man's relationship to reality, and it derives itself from 5 branches of philosophy. The first one is metaphysics, what is real, how does reality operate? The second one is epistemology, how do we know that we know? And the third one goes on to, we go on with ethics, then we go on with values and political systems.
And, sorry, Eso, I hear you taking notes there. Do you think you can mute until it's your turn to talk? Sorry about that. I just don't want to have any interruptions like that.
I'm very sorry. I didn't know that was audible.
It's all right.
Yeah. So objectivists believe that when we first start from metaphysics, we believe that, existence exists. That is an axiom that the universe doesn't need any cause. It just is. And no, it is not tautology, because it would be a contradiction for something to simply not exist. I mean, we could get into that, but that is not the purpose of this question. And we also believe that reality exists regardless of our consciousness. So we don't believe in the primacy of consciousness, entailing that there are some people who think that something exists as long as we perceive it, or that our mind shape reality. Objectivists absolutely disagree with that. And epistemology is, we think, okay, we know that reality exists outside of our consciousness. A tree is a tree, even if I can't see it. But how can I understand whether that thing is a tree? So this is where epistemology comes in. And we objectivists respond to that as we receive sensory data. We, use our eyes, look at its tree, and then we use our conceptualization, our reason, as our means of knowledge, so that we can rely on the conclusions that we come to. That's how we analyze. And we claim that this contrasts to mysticism, that this is the only way we can receive knowledge, again, starting with the senses and then using logic to come conclusions to its basis. And there are other crucial elements that are involved in it. After that, we, kind of go to ethics and politics. We derive politics from this ethics as well. It can be based on feelings, reality and reason are objective. So what in reality gives rise to ethics? Like, why is ethics necessary? And this is the objectivist response. The fact that man is a living being that acts in a certain way in order to keep him alive, we need to be able to free to choose. Like, animals don't have it because they don't have choice. They're automatically programmed. So if we want to remain alive, we have to have life as a standard. And we have to have the means that are objectively required. Like, when we see a river, we just don't drink it. We try to make tools to make our lives easier. We need to be able to produce. We need to be able to choose to survive. And from here, again, Rand drives, her ideas on individualism and capitalism, because these are the only political systems that allows humans to survive and to flourish. And of course, her ideas are heavily influenced by Aristotle and Aquinas, who both, defend a philosophy of reason. So this is how I can summarize what objectivism is. All this, of course, all of this also includes that if life is the standard and if we need concept of natural rights to be able to survive, she also makes the claims that us as individuals, it is moral for us to seek our own self-interest, that it is not rational for us to be forced to help others, or it is irrational for someone to call us immoral because we refuse to help others against our own sake. because there's a whole virtue and value system built upon. And about the question of libertarianism, I'm not well aware of how Esso defines it. I guess he's going to get into it in his own statement. How I define libertarianism, which is, I'm pretty sure Rothbard is the one that made the word popular. I mean, he didn't coin it, but I'm pretty sure he brought out the word and made a part of the liberty movement, which is essentially means supporting the NAP. We can pretty much, shorten it to that sentence. So if that's how we defend libertarian as a person who is defending the non-aggression principle, yeah, objectivism is very much compatible with libertarianism, because it is essentially a whole philosophy based on how you shouldn't aggress upon others. But this is not exactly the question here. Rand herself is not an anarchist. As many people know, she's a minarchist. But again, she doesn't actually defend taxation. She claims in order to have objective law, we cannot have competing companies. I disagree with that, but that is her claim. But however, to overcome the issue of taxation and its unethicality, she claims donation system, where individuals in a society would have to donate to have a third party that may protect their rights. Now, I disagree with them. I'm personally an anarchist, and I think anarchy is also compatible with objectivism and a corollary of Rand's ideas. So that's all for me. I had to explain it. Thanks so much.
All right. We'll hear from Esso. Remember to unmute, because that might get you.
Okay, I'm unmuted. And yeah, I think that was a pretty decent summary of objectivist philosophy, although I'm going to have to make it very clear that my critique of objectivism is split into two different narratives. I would critique it as a political philosophy on the grounds of being a political philosophy separate from why I would critique it on metaphysical grounds, because I have a separate criticism of political philosophy that has more to do with, has more to do with the practical effect that certain. I'll get into it as I elaborate. I digress, but yeah. So I, at this point, would even agree that if you're going to argue for the legitimacy of the ANCAP movement as the basis for characterizing libertarianism, then something akin to objectivism would have to be the basis for the direction that the movement trends in. And the reason for this is because the NAP being considered a necessary component to libertarianism's property theory was introduced to libertarian circles as a concept by Rothbard in the 60s, but that was a philosophical influence that he took from Rand and was not actually how the libertarians, as they would previously have characterized themselves, that their property theory, that's not what their property theory would imply or what it was based on epistemologically. And no, I'm not making the Twitter leftoid argument of all of the OG anarchists. They define what anarchism is, and that's interchangeable with what libertarianism is, and that's basically just Marxism without the socialism step. That's not the case that I'm making here. Proudhon's theory of property was expressly critical of Lockean property, and I would argue that as a methodology, what libertarianism implies about freedom is that property, as Proudhon and the anarchists following Proudhon's influence were characterizing property, those are the norms around which property would be expressed in a free society. But I suppose that because I should take a few steps back again. Libertarianism as a methodology fundamentally itself has implications about what someone that would be following libertarianism as a methodology would even be talking about in making claims about society. They're not, at this point, what we're calling libertarianism internally doesn't exist to serve the purpose of being a philosophical pretext for some sort of moral agenda or some sort of description of how people should behave in order to justify the foundation of something that needs to exist to define a society. Instead, libertarianism, being a methodology, is making claims about what a society is. Now, why I would say libertarianism has to be a methodology, I've made this argument several times, and I'm not sure if you've watched previous streams I've done with Ahmed, but quite simply, it's because in order to make libertarian claims about the nature of action, so claims about property, for example, about concepts that would be related to ethics in society. So the observation of how people behave, interacting with scarce resources in a shared environment, and what actions would imply what consequences in relation to specific actions that have taken place. So what's made clear about this framework right from the start is you need to make specific methodological claims about concepts like action or aggression in order to meaningfully describe what counts as a concept like property or any of these other sociological variables that would emerge in the observation of societies. And if that's the case, then what emerges is a methodology that looks more like the Austrian method in economics. And that's consistent with the principle of concordance in Aristotelian epistemology. But the principle of concordance in Aristotelian epistemology is not internally an axiom. It has a justification that doesn't need to be based on an axiom, which is, in this case, because of the fact that the study of property requires referring to specific actions in order to meaningfully describe property, it has to be a study within the social sciences. Because in order to make claims about societies based on it, it's not possible without these specific descriptions of what would entail concepts relate. I'm trying to find a way to like the words to describe it. Pardon me. The teleological relationship between subjects expressed in that specific environment and in how they interact with one another, what exactly the consequences of that is in that specific relationship. Because when you're making claims about a social environment, you can only base those claims off of what's been observed, and what's been observed is based on the instances of actions that have taken place leading up to what is being observed in that instance. So what I'm getting at is, from a technical perspective, also why I take issue with, in describing claims about society, just even on its face, arguing that making a statement like A equals A can meaningfully be a statement of truth. it is not actually possible to describe something that is an observation of societies without these claims being based in, being based on a specific assumption about what the claim is trying to establish. There's a hidden teleology in statements that begin with axioms, because of the fact that axioms internally are supposed to be they establish the framing device for the rest of the statement as well, because they are internally supposed to be what the entire chain of logic that emerges from them is based on. So what's actually being perceived in an axiomatic statement or a propositional statement is not actually the logical connection between metaphysical concepts and how specific subjects are being expressed. What's actually being perceived is just connections that your brain is making because of assumptions that you already have within your internal narrative of reality about these topics. And that's something that I'm sorry, I'm very, very much like I haven't prepared to really talk about this with anybody, as far as getting into the perceiving cause and effect from within your own reasoning, but approaching your own thought process from the perspective of thinking about how your brain as a machine is processing your senses, and how that is affecting the way that your thought process emerges. It's possible to consciously perceive that, and it's very difficult to explain this, but basically that's what is actually happening when you're perceiving connections within statements that are axiomatic or have a propositional foundation. It's tricking your brain into referring to concepts that you associate with what's being referred to in the statement, but the statement itself is not actually meaningfully describing anything. That's because that gets into, I guess, why I would disagree that meaning is, as a concept, something which inherently exists. In order for meaning to exist, there has to be perception to create it, because any claim about a specific topic is going to have inherent assumptions built into it because of the way that concepts and subjects are teleologically referring to one another. In order to meaningfully describe a logical relationship between concepts and subjects, you have to refer to something that exists other than the statement itself. Otherwise, it's just, you might as well just be making nonsensical noises. It would mean the same thing. If you want to see an example of this, like another logic philosopher making the same claim, look up the Munchausen trilemma thought experiment, or the beetle in a box thought experiment, for someone else to probably elaborate on the point that I'm trying to make more concisely than I am right now. But getting back to what I was explaining, yes, a lot of the problem here is that we need to write thesis papers currently describing a lot of this, because that's the issue with how a lot of people are currently approaching like logic in science is the perception of objectivity is actually a hallucination created by your brain, and meaning doesn't exist until it's perceived, and perception is itself I would agree it's a mechanism that emerges as the result of your brain sense organs. As far as like humans, what allows perception to exist, but that's the mechanism for perception. In order for meaning to emerge, perception has to interact with information. Now, defining information outside of an abstract context is very difficult, but I would say probably the best description of it currently in academia is in the computer sciences. In the computer sciences, as far as logic, and in like the expression of physics, if anyone wants to look into this, see the Einstein-Rosen model of relativity. That probably is the best description of information from a physical perspective that exists. But so in order for your brain to create a narrative of reality, which is how you are processing meaning, perception has to interact with information, and how your brain processes this and how your narrative of reality develops based upon this is established by what led up to you considering that to be an important topic to observe, and what exactly based on this, the range of possible based on this, the range of possible implications which could emerge going forward are gamified within your own internal narrative of reality. So it's not actually possible for there to be a system of deduction that exists independent of your own perception, because within your own perception, how you perceive deduction is itself subtly manipulated by the way your own brain develops.
All right, so
I don't
respond to this, soon.
I'm sorry.
Other thing to give, because you're giving a lot to talk back about. I mean, we can unpack this more,
when I'm done writing all of this, it's gonna be a fucking magnum opus, so I could keep going. It's probably good that you stopped me.
Okay,
but so, there's a lot to go over. I'm very, very sorry, but I said, I'm very unpracticed at trying to explain a lot of this. Sure. And I'm in the process of writing formal proof of most of it, particularly in relation to the nature of the brain, and because that has interesting implications about what a mind itself is that's not lost on me. But it's a lot, and it's not exactly something that you can straightforwardly explain to another person. So I'm very sorry if that was meandering at times.
Sure. Okay, so we'll get to Sue on this now.
Okay, so I have 2 points that I need to raise here.
And real quick, so when can you also mute real quick?
Oh, all right.
Yeah, I'm just hearing some background noise on there.
I would absolutely love to get into the topic of primitive consciousness, and obviously we will, because it's already been talked about for a long time here. But I just want to point out, Esso, that regardless whether objectivism is, metaphysically correct or not, is irrelevant to the concept of is objectivism compatible to libertarianism, right? So if you disagree with that statement, your criticism shouldn't be about perception and reality. It should be about, this is what exact concrete standard I have to define libertarianism, and this definition should be objective. If you don't think objective definitions do not exist, that's another topic, but this is how libertarianism is defined. And this is why I think objectivism is incompatible to it. Now, there are a lot of ideas that I think are wrong. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, I don't disagree with that. That's
okay.
That's the reason I was putting so much emphasis on trying to establish what's different about how I'm describing libertarianism compared to a Rothbardian.
Okay, so you do agree, and just to make sure here for myself and like people watching, you do agree that objectivism is compatible with libertarianism.
I would agree that objectivism is compatible with Rothbardian philosophy. What I'm stating to make a summary of my claim more explicit in this regard is that because libertarianism is not actually a political philosophy, the way that the ANCAP movement describes property is not actually compatible with what libertarianism implies is freedom.
How do you define libertarianism? What would you pursue libertarianism as? Do you agree with me that libertarianism is basically something that Rothbard coined, and we're going with that?
No,
and do you think
I don't.
Wrong? How do you define libertarianism?
Well, I would describe libertarianism as, in that name, a description of how scholastic philosophy, in its inception, that name, it was a method within scholastic philosophy around the 1600s. Not exactly sure what period of time it started emerging, but it was originally a methodology within the study of the natural sciences, trying to explain that free will existed and why it emerged within the study of societies. And the reason that it was important, and it was originally an express competitor to attempts to describe determinism from a metaphysical perspective. And this movement, since it emerges out of scholastic philosophy, is metaphysically based on Aristotle's perspective on social philosophy. So Aristotelian logic's claim about societies would logically be interchangeable. Well, let me rephrase that. Libertarianism I see as essentially just being an extension of Aristotle's metaphysics being applied to the study of societies, specifically in regards to topics that relate to ethical concepts. So property, for example.
Okay, so when you talk about, scholastic trends in 1400s, can you define that for someone like me who doesn't know what you mean by, scholastic trend 1400s? You did say Aristotle's metaphysics, which makes it more clear. But can you clarify on the previous?
Yeah, scholastic philosophy was Aristotelian metaphysics in medieval Europe, essentially. I mean, that's a very generalized summary of it. But in terms of if you want to understand what its claims about logic are, it's Aristotelian philosophy before the nuance of there being competing approaches to logic was established in the 1700s. That it was possible to have competing methodological claims within the natural sciences.
What about this exactly makes you define it as libertarianism? Why do you define libertarianism from there?
I characterize this as libertarianism because the movement, as far as let me find a way of phrasing this. Pardon me. Libertarianism, the metaphysical movement went on to inspire the levelers, and the levelers as a social movement were an influence on both liberalism and anarchism. And the difference metaphysically between liberalism and anarchism, from how they emerged out of the leveler movement, is that anarchism was based on libertarianism's metaphysical claims about societies, and liberalism based its claims on the Socratic method and political philosophy, and tried to argue within the context of rights philosophy instead. Because if you look at if you look at Proudhon's essays, for example, he just explicitly states this, and he explicitly characterizes his claims about property as social theories rather than normative claims about how people ought to behave or policy agendas.
Okay.
And I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm still confused at the part of how, Aristotelian metaphysics, right, is defined, matters as they plays a crucial role in your definition for libertarianism.
Oh, okay. Because okay, so I see where the disconnect is occurring. My bad. So, and I suppose this is where I need to establish what I mean by Aristotelian metaphysics, because this is something that a lot of people have been confused about, and this is something that is a point that sort of gets to the sort of range of topics I was referring to in the beginning, where I was kind of, just expecting people to see a connection I was making, but I needed to establish. So what I mean by this is Epicurus's expansion upon Aristotle's social theories and his and that being distinct from classical Aristotelian metaphysics, which was just an extension of the Socratic method. What distinguished Epicurus's expansion upon Aristotle's metaphysics is that Epicurus noted that in Aristotle's observations about logic, that if one were to make claims about sociological phenomenon, basically, this isn't how it would have been described at the time, obviously, but if one were to make claims about concepts that emerge only when societies exist, then it would only be possible to base observations on them as operating within the internal logic of the people who are acting within that specific environment, and what the specific nature of their action both implies and entails in terms of what was performed, and the implications of this on the environment around that social group.
Okay, so just to understand better, are you making a statement based on determinism and indeterminism? Is this what you're trying to issue?
What I'm getting at is that Epicurus pointed out that if one were making claims about society, then based on what Aristotle had established in metaphysics, one would have to base those claims on actions performed only after they're performed, because the act of performing them would be what defines them. And the problem is this refutes how the Socratic method characterizes polis. So would undermine the basis of it would undermine the basis of any sort of normative claims about how people ought to behave, or the framing of claims about societies as, basically, it turns claims which are framed this way into something controversial, which internally have to be justified. Because, this is actually what this reveals is that this is actually just a statement of justification within an already established social system, at least in practice. Like what the enforcement of norms would be from the perspective of somebody that in their narrative of reality is modeling societies the way that the Socratic method characterizes polis. Which do I need to get into that, or?
Yeah. Real quick, I just want to say, like, it seems like there's a confusion. I mean, probably on the other end in general for a lot of people that are watching, just based on the comments I'm seeing. So I just, not to make any sort of claim or anything, but just to sort of maybe raise a point that perhaps could lead to some more clarification as far as what people are looking for. It seems like there's a disconnect as far as the understanding of how necessarily objectivism is refuting not the primacy of consciousness, but some of the points you're making about when it comes to is objectivism like accepting polis? Like, how is it doing so? Like, pretty much, like, what are the conflicts between objectivism and what you're stating?
Well, and that's what I was
that are essentially leading it to negate libertarianism or be in contradiction with it.
And that's exactly where I was going with that. But yeah, I'm sorry it takes a while. But go ahead. I apologize.
So I think you're making a mistake where libertarianism is a legal theory. Okay, so questions on determinism or socialist metaphysics or Socratic method, I still confused on how do these, change the definition of libertarianism. Libertarianism, in the end of the day, is a legal theory, right? How do we do when other people acts without virtue, unjust, right? It's something we need in a social context. We wouldn't learn libertarianism if there was only one person on earth. And how to act
in a social context.
Yes. How to act in a social context. Because why would we need the concept of a legal theory if there's only one person on earth and there's no chance for injustice to take place? Right? It's a legal theory. That's in the end of the day. That's what libertarianism is.
But internally, where do all of the assumptions that within your perception of reality make those things that need to be established for a society to exist? Why are those factors relevant? And why are we not just describing what happens when people act in groups of other people, which is how we would talk about societies in the context of anything other than social norms?
Are you asking me why would we not need libertarianism outside of social norms? Is that what the question is?
I'm asking within the internal reasoning of the question, what's the justification for framing this as something that's needed? Like, what is it needed for, and why?
Prevent aggression. To prevent aggression. So, yeah, that's how simple it is.
And that's what I'm getting at, though. That has a specific assumption about what the nature of aggression is, which is based on a specific assumption about the nature of action. So, it in order to characterize libertarianism as a legal theory, you need to make claims about property and about these concepts in society, which libertarianism framed as a methodology would refute.
Can you repeat that?
In order to describe concepts like property or economies or anything that's a sociological variable, basically, in order to describe them within the context of any philosophy based on the Socratic method, one has to describe these as axioms or as propositions because of the assumption, because of specifically the claim internally that the Socratic method makes. that in order for a claim of knowledge to be valid, then you would have to be able to make it in a universal context. Basically, just that a universal context that can exist. But
okay, so
yeah,
is just a method that Socrates used to question and challenge people and their assumptions into getting responses. How does the Socratic method come in here?
But what I'm pointing out is that all political philosophy describes property in an epistemological framework, which, whether or not one realizes it, because of how these concepts refer to, because of how political ideology refers to concepts like property, makes it meaningfully impossible to describe them if we are making the assumption internally that this is valid, regardless of whether or not it is. Because we're perceiving it as valid, it means that it's only possible to talk about societies within a context where this is perceived as valid. But in perceiving this as valid, it limits the range of possible it fixes basically the way that you perceive going forward what counts as relevant to observing phenomena within entailed subjects. So all political ideologies have hidden epistemological assumptions.
Okay, so I have to interrupt here, right? A lot of people are here confused. You can check YouTube chats too.
Yeah.
So, can you define what libertarianism to me in a sentence that doesn't have words longer than 10? That's the limit. Can you have any definition for what libertarianism is within a maximum of 10 to 12 words, so all of us can understand it?
As a methodology or as a political philosophy? Because I characterize those at this point as essentially two different movements.
Okay, so we're getting somewhere. You have two different understandings of libertarianism. One is a methodological one.
Yes, that's what I've been stating this whole time.
So the political
and what I'm saying is that as a political philosophy, libertarianism is making essentially the exact same claims about society as liberalism does, except under the guise of being libertarianism.
Okay, so you do agree that the political definition is a legal theory that we mainstream stereotypically know, the legal theory based on an AP. Do you agree that this is the political definition?
Yes, I would agree that that the ANCAP movement and Rothbardianism has created a philosophical movement that defends a legal theory that calls itself libertarianism. Yes, I would agree with this.
I'm just glad we clarified that part, and I think you said earlier that will be compatible with objectivism. Now we come to the second part. I don't think libertarianism is a methodological theory. I don't think you can back it up to medieval scholasticism. I don't think you can make the argument that it is some sort of has roots to modern libertarianism. I don't think.
Oh well, that's not my
normative theory. I don't think it's related to the Socratic method. I think there's a relationship between libertarianism and the Aristotle's metaphysics, but I don't understand what you mean by libertarian methodology. So
I made it expressly clear. It's because it's not possible to describe concepts which libertarianism necessarily has to without specific metaphysical assumptions. And because of those metaphysical assumptions, the only possible epistemological theory which could imply libertarianism would have to be based on Aristotelian metaphysics, specifically expanded on what Epicurus observed.
Okay, so where we're getting at. We're getting somewhere. You think that political libertarianism exists, but am I understanding you correctly? In order to justify that political libertarianism, you have to have a sort of methodology and a background, and this comes from metaphysics.
No, as a political movement, the metaphysics of libertarianism are based on Lockean property, which ties them directly to the Socratic method, because Lockean property makes the same epistemological assumptions about the observation of societies as the Socratic method. It explicitly cites the social contract, which is an attempt, which, by the way, whether or not, you know what, I'm not even going to get into that right now, but this is explicit. This is essentially, in liberalism, the conceptual recreation of Paulus, and it exists for the purpose internally of explaining how property titles emerge without needing to explain the enforcement of the state. As an organization, how to frame it as a phenomenon that just emerges, and now I'm not implying that's deliberate, but that is the practical consequence of doing this, which causes problems from a methodological libertarian perspective, because claims about action can only meaningfully they can only meaningfully describe something that has happened or something which can happen if it's based on essentially a system which already exists or can be expressed. And what I mean by a system is a specific instance of an environment or a social group, because that ultimately determines the course of all norms, all norms of behavior emerge, because all of what emerges is determined on what's established by how people behave in that environment.
So another question, trying to get to the bottom of your mind. If you had to define methodological libertarianism in a sentence that's no longer than 10 to 12 words, what would that be?
Well, I guess the problem here is we're kind of running into the same issue that emerged in Liquid Zulu stream, where you're trying to reframe my statement itself as a proposition, when what I'm arguing explicitly is that propositional logic itself is false, which I pointed out earlier emerges because axiomatic statements have hidden teleological assumptions. That's what I was referring to earlier about the
real quick. Hold on. Let me get in real quick. It just seems that, even amongst the chat, there's a bit of a confusion as to what methodological libertarianism even is. It seems like, based on the claims being made, well, from other people, I'm just saying that is ill-defined, or that, there's not actually a definition being given. There's just sort of like historical movements being pointed to, and then there's no actual concrete understanding of it.
And I made it expressly clear that what I'm basing this on is not the historical movements. That is, I cited the historical movements to show how it developed, but no, my claim is based on the fact that if you are making statements of truth about concepts which in order to meaningfully describe them can only be observed within a society, then it is only possible to make claims about it within the rules of the norms that could emerge within that particular society. And that is relative to specific individuals acting within specific environments, at least from a and I'm not arguing that you can't make observations beyond specific behaviors, but that because of the fact that this is what action is, and this is how action emerges in the environment, it doesn't even make sense to try to describe, to even make propositional statements about it, because they're not really like, you can, with a propositional statement, you can essentially propose, well, an ought, and this isn't really just a reframing of the is-ought argument, although the is-ought argument, you know, touches upon sort of this issue. But in characterizing libertarianism as a political philosophy itself, you have to assume that societies are something different than how someone who is characterizing libertarianism as a methodology would, because the purpose of libertarianism as a methodology is not, I don't mean purpose as like to imply intent, but it is explicitly a refutation of the Socratic method. So a metaphysical movement which internally needs the Socratic method to be valid in order for how it characterizes concepts in society to work internally. If this movement relies on assuming that the Socratic method is valid, then it is in fundamental conflict with the movement that is making a competing claim to the Socratic method in how it describes the same concepts.
I have to interfere in here. So I think, and I'm saying this in good faith, definitions matter, right? I can't argue on something if we don't agree on the definition. So if I argue that apples are purple and you argue that apples are red, and if I mean some exotic tropical fruit that's actually purple, we're never going to agree because we have completely different understandings and definitions, right? And I think your mind functions uniquely, and sometimes, you know, the way you explain things, it may be harder for another person to get into it and get to the down. But in the end of the day, me, definitions matter. So in good faith, I'm just trying to understand.
I agree.
What is methodological libertarianism, right? So for me, if you could just simplify, you know, I'm not in your mind. It's hard for me to communicate in your mind. Could you please simplify?
Bro got called neurodivergent.
Short words.
It's true.
By methodological libertarianism, you know, simplify as much as you can. You can take this as an insult for me. I don't care, but please simplify as much as you can.
But I'm not insulted.
Clueless. No. I mean, like, you can take an insult as that against me. It doesn't matter. Just please simplify as much as you can. What is methodological libertarianism? I need to be able to understand the definition for me to go on this conversation.
Well, and I suppose I should clarify that it seems like you're, because of the way that you're like phrasing what you're looking for, like a sentence or two response, you're looking for a summary, whereas what I'm trying to describe is how I came to my competing conclusions so that you can also understand it. I am providing a definition. It's that a definition is supposed to be showing someone else a blueprint of how you got to your conclusion compared to theirs, at least from my perspective.
Okay, so what is the definition exactly? In very simple words. Let's say there's a 10-year-old kid in front of you, okay? He asked, Eso, what is methodological libertarianism? What would you say?
It is the scientific observation. I suppose I should already take a step back. It is a competing claim about the nature of societies to the Socratic method, which frames its claims about the nature of what actions could emerge within ethical disputes as needing to be based on actions performed. That is the most simple. That is the most general summary I can provide.
Okay, so real quick, could you explain
basically praxeology, but not applied to economics, applied to how property norms emerge instead?
Could you explain the Socratic method a bit further for those that aren't understanding?
The Socratic, which aspect of it? Because
I mean, just sort of like giving people an understanding of what they're like, because you're saying it's competing to that. So it's just to help people understand, like, what is it competing against?
Okay, well, the sense in which it is putting forward a competing claim to the Socratic method is how the Socratic method describes societies, which the social theory within the Socratic method is framing the concept around a conglomerate term known as polis, or referred to as polis internally. And polis is internal to the Socratic method, an attempt to illustrate the implication of Socratic metaphysics in societies and in how societies emerge. I'm being very general because the disagreements that I'm going to be, the specific bases of why I would contest the Socratic method bleed a lot into its assumptions about universals, and how that in
discussion technique.
Yeah, and it's a discussion technique that is based on that again has a very specific metaphysical assumptions about the nature of societies and about the nature of logic itself. And its attempt is to establish universals, propositions. The basis of them in metaphysics as it being what establishes what counts as truth.
Okay, so let's get with a physical concrete example. Right, I'm Socrates. I like going in the market to ask people questions and annoy them to get to the bottom of truth, right? So you just said that it has a specific metaphysical basis. So
yeah,
I go and I ask the fisherman, what is courage? That was the name of the book, right? Lucas.
Everything about what is being described here isn't something that in how it is expressed in practice would just emerge how it's being described here. What is the action that we're describing here? What's the internal motivation behind it?
Okay,
what's
so
the perception of the person?
I'm Socrates, and I ask, what is bravery or courage? First question, what is the internal motivation I have, and how does this relate to metaphysics? And secondly, how does this relate to the definition of methodological libertarianism? As the person of Socrates asking fishermen about what is courage.
Okay, so would you agree? Would you agree that praxeology is a valid method for approaching the study of action in economies?
Yes.
Why is this different from making claims in sociological variables then? Like property, for example. Why does the metaphysical framework change from property to economics? Because in economics, claims are based on action, and as a result, they would the internal motivation behind specific instances of action are what defines them in the first place, and that therefore is the epistemological basis of what causes them to be. So that's what we're observing. We're not observing we're not making claims about what people ought or ought not to do, because it's not even possible to do so without having internal assumptions about what a society even is. So what we're talking about is what a society is and what this is based on.
Okay, so praxeology, right, is the idea that human action is seen as a purposeful behavior where individuals aim to achieve some end. This end can be objective, rational, or rational, doesn't matter. They're trying to use means to attain the ends they want. Okay, so how does this, right, related to your definition of what methodological libertarianism is. That individuals
and by the way, to clarify, I didn't make up the notion of libertarianism being a metaphysical theory. I described very clearly, first of all, what this is based on, but also I linked Ahmed a article about it because I noticed I noticed the framing of your theory, and I am going to be proposing, like I said, I'm going to be releasing many essays and thesis papers about some of the things we've been studying over the last few years, but I'm not just making up what I'm describing here. Whether or not I exist, everything that I've talked about still stands.
Okay, real quick, I forwarded that to you, Sue, if you want to take a look at that for any purpose right now. That will, of course, still consume the time here, but that's just for your reference.
Oh, so we are getting into free will and determinism and indeterminism.
Yeah, I mentioned that from the start.
I asked that question to you earlier. Are we getting into determinism and indeterminism? And I
said, yeah.
Okay, so here's my next question. Why is objectivism is not compatible, right, to a discussion that is built around free will and determinism? Do you think, objectivism is deterministic?
Not in how it would characterize itself internally, but because of the assumptions that an objectivist would need to make about the nature of action, it would not be possible to make claims about the nature about societies from an objectivist perspective without needing to refer to some sort of concept in your internal narrative of reality, which effectively causes all behavior to either need to be predetermined by some factor outside of their ability to control it, or internally that in order for a society to exist, societies just need to be defined by an arbitrary series of behaviors being performed. And if that's not the case, then even if what's observed is people socializing, well, then just for some reason it doesn't count as a society. That seems really to be the only way that any movement which assumes that internally that universals have to be valid can respond to these problems emerging. And that is the fundamental problem here, is that it can only perceive itself as being a free will philosophy because of the fact that it makes assumptions about metaphysics that it's not internally justifying, that limit what it perceives the nature of action to be, so that determinism is perceived as as what would be free will, but is not itself how free will would have been described emerging out of metaphysics. Sort of like what happened with the difference between political philosophy emerging out of the Socratic method compared to social philosophy emerging out of libertarianism. It's another point, essentially, where they are disconnecting metaphysical movements.
Okay. First of all, what I will say is that my first thing that I will say, when the proposition about libertarianism and objectivism, all these are talked about. First of all, nobody thinks about determinism and the indeterminism in free will discussion. But now I do get your point completely. I think there was a disconnect going on. And I do think that your claim of the methodological libertarianism, that is a little bit problematic definition and something that just doesn't exist in the literature and nobody defines it that way. So you need to be able to substantially define that word better. Like if you're going to bring,
I would agree. I would agree that at this point, what is primarily associated with the libertarian movement is the ANCAP movement and its specific claims about the nature of property. And that's I'm not at this point trying to associate what's been established by the Backalley with the libertarian movement.
Okay, and I will also continue to say that with the discussion of free will and determinism, I don't think this still takes, like, I don't think there is a definition I still don't think the definition of methodological libertarianism exists. I need a rational reasoning why would such a definition would come across, but I want to also, be able to respond to the claims about objectivism and determinism. I want to make sure to explain that, yes, objectivism, right, does reject the notion of indeterminism, right? But it does say that individuals have the capacity to make choices and act according to their own rational judgment. There is no rejection of free will also. However, this free will is compatible with the deterministic nature of reality, but the individual's choices and actions are still determined by their own, volition and the objective facts of the world around them. So in here, when we look around it, first of all, I want to clarify that objectivism is, not completely indeterministic, because there's still an emphasis on reason and causality and understanding, metaphysics and human action. So in here, how we can continue doing here is, how does this relate to justifying coming up with a new definition of something called methodological libertarianism and Ayn Rand's ideas on, deterministic nature of reality. However, the indeterministic way that our mind can work through rational judgment will exclude her from this definition that you created.
Well, first of all, I didn't create it. I explained exactly why I came to this conclusion. It's because in order to make claim, I said it. I don't want to repeat myself. I stated it like 3 times already, but and I apologize. But getting on to the second point, it's not necessary. Again, Ayn Rand can consider, or anybody can consider themselves to be a proponent of free will, but if what they assume about the nature of action and what informs action from a metaphysical perspective is different than the other person, then the claim that's being made, even if it's the exact same propositional statement, is not the same statement in terms of what it implies metaphysically, because in a single statement, like if you were to represent a single statement as a proposition, every single concept that every point in that line of reasoning represents is within how someone is reading that specific line of propositional logic. The connections being made are projected onto it by the person that is reading it, because there isn't a meaningful description being provided. It's just a statement it's just a concept that is tricking your brain into invoking something in your memory. Now, that's the reason why objectivity is perceived in like from your perspective. As for what metaphysically is taking place, that's a different question. But metaphysically, the nature of action, we already talked about it. Just like in libertarianism, it's based on what specifically in the claim is being made is being observed. So there needs to be a action that was performed that's being observed, that has a series, that has an environment and steps leading up to it that contextualize it, that therefore define what it is. And Rand doesn't characterize concepts this way. Rand characterizes there being a universal perception through which all things can be understood, as does any movement based on the Socratic method. And the problem that this creates is this has different implications about how one internally would perceive at the study of societies, even if someone is making, even if, say, you were to have an objectivist compared to a methodological libertarian, or just, someone making a competing claim to objectivists metaphysically, if they were to both defend free will, they can make the exact same claim propositionally, but metaphysically the claim means something different.
Okay, so there's the concept of emergency of concepts, and then you reject propositions, and then there's the issue of objectivism rejecting the notion of indeterminism. Okay, so I'm just gonna get all of these together to send us. First of all, do you think if someone argues that there are objective facts of the world around someone, right, and the nature of reality does have a deterministic element to it, do you, yes or no, do you think this excludes her from the definition of libertarianism that you based on free will versus determinism? Is this what it comes down to?
Well, the statement, like the concept of objective reality is a tautology, but I suppose more specifically, what you mean is if someone perceived, like, I'm asking a question just to clarify, I'm not putting words in your mouth. So would, I suppose, to be more precise, this be a more accurate way of characterizing what you're asking? If someone perceives universals informing action and whatever they associate with universals, if this is what the basis of their view of societies is, does that have an influence on whether or not their internal philosophy can be compatible with libertarianism as a legal theory or libertarianism as a methodology?
Wait, are you asking me the objectivist philosophy overall is compatible with libertarian ligatory?
No, the question, the implications of this question specifically.
No, what I'm trying to ask is a very simple yes or no question. I'm not trying to be aggressive. Do you think that Ayn Rand's ideas, right, on rejecting the notion of indeterminism excludes her from being a libertarian, which libertarian here is defined, right, as agents having free will? Let's say we define it we go from this. Yes.
It's more like, I don't think that what Ayn Rand is characterizing is actually free will. I think that it's an attempt to characterize free will that fails.
Okay. So what definition she had on free will that you think is defined wrong?
The problem specifically that I have with it is that in order for one to have a claim about what can inform action, then metaphysically it has to be based on what was performed. So you're not actually describing something that goes into action, and therefore you're not actually describing societies. You're referring to an axiom that is named free will and are insisting that it is a necessary step to cause something that is called property to emerge, which then you're insisting is necessary to cause something called sociological variable. You see, because of the fact that it's just a concept that exists in a vacuum, everything that emerges on top of it is completely meaningless as far as its explanatory power in relation to everything else within its internal reasoning.
Okay, so I'm not sure if we have the same definition of free will, right? Here's what objectivists will say about free will, right? It's a fundamental capacity of individuals to make these choices and decisions independently, right? Capacity, the keyword.
An hour,
you disagree.
An hour and a half of trying to describe that every claim, whether or not it's valid internally, is like its own Mandelbrot set.
Internally, what who said?
That's just a summary of essentially what I've been trying to describe for the last hour and a half. That deduction is not something that exists universally because it exists out of your own narrative of reality. Because of the fact deduction isn't something that exists as one single system, universals can't exist, therefore objectivity can't exist. So metaphysically, that's my problem with the concept of objectivity in cause and effect. As far as, and I guess the bulk of the conversation, as far as the actual topic that that it's been centered around, has been a very convoluted, roundabout way of using the differences between libertarianism as a methodology and how, in what is implied in how it describes concepts in societies, contrasting this with political philosophy.
Okay.
This stream is going to be very interesting to go back and watch. But listening to this in real time, I'm sure it's just a complete mind fuck.
I'm having a yes. I was thinking the word mind fuck. I'm having a complete mind fuck right now. Anyways, let's continue. Right. Okay. So trying to get to the bottom of this again.
Well, okay. So real quick, we do have 13 minutes and a half left. Just letting you guys know, because I mean I just missed the 15-minute mark just due to conversation. Also, Esther, make sure you buy her mine dinner after.
Are we going to do a Q&A too after this?
Yeah, after the 13 minutes.
All right.
Right.
I'm sure most of the questions are just going to be some variation of oh my god, how was the fifth dimension? I don't know.
Okay, I'm gonna talk. Okay. All right. First of all, I defined free will, right? You didn't define free will. You went on to say how, objective perception exists and is contradictory. And so you need to be able to define things. You need to be able to say, you define free will this way. Here's why I think that definition is wrong. And here's what here's my definition of it. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm not providing a proposition. I'm describing why I come to a different conclusion, and I'm defining it by the steps that led me there, instead of proposing an axiom.
Okay, you're not you're not making propositions because wait, as far as I remember, you think propositions do not exist. But I'm not even gonna get in there because if you actually thought that, we wouldn't be able to have this whole conversation. So
Well,
can
my
you
rhetoric.
just
Sorry, go ahead.
define free will for me? Again, let's go back to the thing, right? A lot of people are confused, right? So that means the way you communicate, there's always a disconnect causing it. I'm a 10-year-old kid. I ask you, Eso, what is free will? How do you answer? Please, very simply.
Yeah, I spent a good year actually just like contemplating how exactly I could restructure my rhetorical style to explaining some of the I guess the more recent things that have come out of our study to other people, because this communication breakdown, you're absolutely right. It's an ongoing issue, and I thought for a while that it was on my end, but I was approaching this from every single possible perspective I could. And
what is free will?
What I'm getting at is this is how I learned essentially that statements that begin with propositions have hidden teleological assumptions about what the purpose internally of making a statement about the concept they're describing is. And that's what I'm trying to get at. Yes, I don't. Yeah, I don't agree that that it's valid to start a statement with a proposition, and the standard around which I'm being criticized here is that I'm not defining the concepts I'm referring to based on propositions.
Okay, the proposition is the sky is blue, right? If you're incapable of defining that the sky is blue and explaining why the sky is blue,
in order to describe the concept of a sky and it being blue, that needs to mean something functionally in order for it to not just be meaningless words. Like what is the difference logically between the axiom sky and the phenomenon sky that emerges in the environment that defines what you're actually basing your claims on? There's no way of distinguishing between those two things within the Socratic method because of the fact that the Socratic method assumes that deduction is a universal system.
But even right now, when you're making these statements, you're basing them on, from a propositional perspective. I have to pronounce it. I don't know.
Well, my statement is, as I'm presenting it in the context of this conversation, is propositional because human language is limited to a propositional format. But what I'm describing is, yes, that's why I'm not trying to explain the nature of these concepts with propositions. Aside from the fact that I don't agree you can base claims of truth on propositions, there are concepts that are literally it's not possible to even describe them as propositions. And sociological variables are one such concept.
Listen, I'm gonna talk more because you taught like 80% in this thing.
So go ahead. That's fair.
Yes. Okay. How do you identify and validate and understand reality, right, without propositional statements? How do you make claims right now about identifying objectivism, validating objectivism, or understanding objectivism, and whether it contradicts or not, and without having any statements about understanding that reality?
Well, I think
this relates to the whole discussion of the free will in determinism. I'm still confused on the part why this would specifically make objectivism incompatible to libertarianism. But at this point, I put that aside, and I'm getting to the conversation about propositions.
Yeah, I think at this point it would be more. I think it would be more useful from from the perspective of this conversation to describe why internally you consider objectivity to be a valid concept in logic philosophies. Because I mean, I've explained, I've described intimately what my problem with objectivity is, but I'm not hearing, I guess I'm not hearing a perspective to compare that against. Why are we assuming internally that it exists other than just it needing to exist to make an observation?
You're confused on why would you need propositions to make observations?
Well, the internal reasoning that I've heard from, your argument throughout the entire stream, basically the claim that you've made defending propositional logic, I don't know why I didn't just phrase it that way, but that actually is something I can fairly straightforwardly say. The claim that, God fucking damn it! Now I lost my train of thought.
It only took 90 minutes.
Repeat your question. Repeat your question. My bad.
Okay, let's scatter this. Everyone wants to hear. You're making statements based on propositions. You're claiming to not provide propositions.
Okay. Yes. Now, thank you.
These
that reminds me of where I was.
Propositions.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting at. Is I've explained a bunch of problems with propositional logic from the perspective of how the brain internally processes reasoning compared to how logic is actually expressed, how it's expressed just abstractly in logic, problems that assuming it exists creates in informing methodologies for studying various topics. And all that I've heard as far as why objectivity as a concept has to exist is that it needs to exist so that truth can be objectively observed.
It exists. So how do you objectively observe truth? Do you think, are we capable of objectively observing the truth?
Well, I guess what's your theory of truth, and how do you propose a concept of truth that doesn't need to refer to the assumption that objectivity exists?
Okay, so for me, truth is just something that exists in reality, objectively, right? It is a truth that plates tend to be circle. And how do I know that? I look at plates, I see them. That's the sensor data part. And in my mind, I've seen circles before, so I know the concept of a circle. And I use my reasoning to make the conclusion that, plates are circles. And then I make a propositional statement. Many plates are circles and are in the shape of a circle, whatever. So, how do you propose to reach truth other than this method?
But you're assuming that what you're talking about is a plate and not the material that makes up the plate and claims about it, which are also true. And internally, why is describing this object as a plate and framing this conversation about it, why is this more valid than describing the plate as, say, a ceramic object and studying it from the perspective of a ceramic object?
I mean, then
which one is true?
I look at the ceramic object, and it's ceramic, and I know what ceramic is, and it's true. Why would that be contradictory to it being a circle?
Well, but those are both claims that are true simultaneously. even though they're fundamentally different narratives about the same topic.
They're not.
They're the same topic, but different meaning is applied fundamentally by different approaches to perception, and different approaches to perception inform consequently what emerges going forward.
No, because the plate is ceramic and the plate is circle, right?
That's
Both
true.
statements are objectively correct. The plate is ceramic.
Is it objective to describe it as a ceramic based on the content of a ceramic object, or is it correct to describe it as a plate? And if so, how do we establish this?
I look at it and it's ceramic, and I look what ceramic is, and I established it as ceramic.
But those imply fundamentally different things, because plate is describing an object's use within social conventions, and describing an object as ceramic is based on its chemical and elemental properties. So it's fundamentally two different methodological frameworks that you would have to be operating around.
Not really. It just because there are two different statements it doesn't matter, as long as there's no contradiction. It doesn't make any change in its metaphysical sense.
Well, right? I'm not saying. Yeah, I'm not.
It doesn't disprove propositions. But shout out to Casimir from here. He really, really wants me to ask you this. I don't know if you're listening to this, Casimir. He wants me to ask you: is what you said true? Is what you just said true? He really wants me to ask you this right now.
Is what I stated true? Well, what theory of truth are you referring to?
Okay.
Because truth itself has metaphysical assumptions, which is what I'm getting at. And to refer to something as objectively true in that statement, for that to be a meaningful description of something that exists, it would have to be based on something which caused that conclusion to emerge. But internally, a statement that assumes that truth is objective is just a self-reference, because the concept of objectivity is to assert that claims can only be valid if truth can be a universal.
All right, guys, we're at the end of our time real quick. I mean, I'll let Sue say her question, but we really can't get to much more addressing of this. I mean, if you guys want to do a little bit more just to resolve this, but we're about to get to
I wasn't expecting this to be like a groundbreaking debate, like I said from the start.
Wait, one more question. Is what you just said objectively true?
No, because objectivity doesn't exist.
So how do you know it's true?
Why do you assume that objectivity is the basis of truth? And why do you assume that objectivity exists?
If it doesn't exist, how do you know it doesn't exist?
Why is it the basis for determining whether or not something exists?
But you just rejected propositions. You just rejected objective truth and propositions while making objective propositions.
But that's not my basis for critiquing the concept. I just spent most of the stream going over problems that it creates in metaphysics. At this point, your defense for why objectivity is valid in metaphysics is because it's needed to make propositional statements. No. And as I just mentioned,
I'm just pointing out that yours is contradictory because you're doing the same thing that I do. I have my own justification of objectivity, and I already explained it in my opening statement on how I define existence.
Yeah, but
right?
I'm not basing what I'm saying in this conversation. I'm not basing what I'm saying is true off of my statement in and of itself, which is almost how you seem to be treating it. Human, like what can be communicated through human language is limited in its literal sense to a propositional format because speech has a definite start and end. That's not a logical phenomenon. That's just a practical limitation to how people communicate.
All right, so we're hitting the top of the hour. I mean, you guys can use up your time as like your closing statements to even address this question, but we are going to get to it. You know, so we can start with Sue if you'd like to go ahead, and then we'll get to Esso on that, and then we'll get to questions.
Yeah, I think it's already established that objectivism is compatible with political libertarianism. When it comes to determinism, I still don't think there is something called, you know, methodological libertarianism. And I don't even think Friend is indeterministic. I already explained what her definition of determinism and indeterminism is. And when it comes to linguistics, I also don't think linguistic ambiguity would result in a sense where we couldn't understand reality. I don't think information like is some kind of separate and distinct cognitive phenomenon. I think it just, you know, information is just this rearrangement of physical matter into a form that, you know, encodes to some mental content. So this kind of linguistic ambiguity wouldn't change our understanding. So if a plate is ceramic and a circle at the same time, both propositions that the plate is circle and the plate is ceramic are true. These wouldn't be true. One of them wouldn't be true if they actually contradicted to each other. And I do think that if someone is making the claim that propositions cannot be used to explain reality, you know, that would make it contradictory for a person who has used a lot of propositions throughout the conversation.
Just to clarify, I'm not claiming that like the physical contents of the plate are changing depending on how you approach it. Like that's not what my claim is. My claim is that the implications of what you're observing change depending on your question itself.
Okay. Are you gonna go to your own closing statement?
Well, I just did not want to be misrepresented. I wanted to nip that in the bud.
That's fine. I if you're gonna do Q&A, you should probably go to your closing statement as well.
I'm muting now.
Okay. So, I mean, we have a general question as far as like from people, but Oddities and Rarities asks it, I mean, you know, pretty much more simply than a lot of other people, because a lot of people are saying, well, how do you know that's true? How do you know that's true? How do you know that's true? I mean, pretty much this was kind of addressed, but I guess, you know, maybe getting a more intricate statement. How can we arrive at truth?
So what informs the theory of knowledge that's being presented here? That would be that's I guess that would require another stream in and of itself to go over. I don't even really know how I would summarize it, but I tried to explain it throughout the stream. Not how you arrive at truth, but how you determine the rule. It's not so much that there is a definite point at which you can say everyone understands a single quote unquote truth. It's more like there are rules based on what characteristics you can observe in physical patterns that you're interacting with that allow you to create consistent and repeatable methods for manipulating them to create increasingly sophisticated systems that allow you to observe increasingly sophisticated logical structures. And it's just a pattern of that which becomes more or less sophisticated depending on how many levels of this of implications you're expanding upon the initial point with, or how many steps back you're going in terms of what is entailed leading up to the point that you're observing in a specific chain of events.
Okay.
And that's and what that specific point is relative to the question that you're asking itself.
And by the way, either person is free to hop in after the person who the question was addressed to has answered. So, you know, just for reference, like for instance now, Sue, if you would like to answer this question or say anything about what Esso just said, you can in a short summary. If you
want. And to clarify, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I want to answer. I would love to answer the question on how can we arrive at truth from the objectivist perspective. It's really not complicated. It's through observation and try to make sense of it. And it doesn't matter that different people have different perceptions. So I want to clarify this part. I think I made this example before. Let's say two people goes next to a tree. There's a tree. I had my first kiss under that tree, and my friend has a memory of bumping his head to the tree. Okay, we both have different kind of memories about that tree. And this might, like bring out different emotions in our mind, and our brain might produce different kinds of hormones when it encounters a tree. I don't think this difference in perception, for an example, however, would deform how we encode the data. We still see a tree whose like the body is brown and has green leaves, and maybe it's an apple tree and we see the apples. It still doesn't change that information. And we also, humans, have the capability, even though our brain perceives certain things based specifically on memories, right? Is still capable of overcome those emotions and understand what it perceives and sees.
And okay, I just wanted to add on to that because I didn't clarify this in my initial response. How a person perceives truth and the nature of truth metaphysically are two different concepts, because how a person, I just wrote it in the side of the chat here as a note, but for those who can't see it, I guess I'll just repeat verbatim what I wrote, because how a person perceives what they understand the concept of truth to be is informed by their own perception of reality's system of deduction, how they understand what deduction is, because their perception of every concept is determined by their own perception of deduction.
Do you think people can't apply the law of non-contradiction in a similar way, right? Because another way of understanding reality is to put the data in a way without contradictions. Since we're trying to know principles.
How do you recognize when a contradiction has emerged if you don't have a common understanding of what knowledge is?
But there, first of all, right, okay, you can understand whether it's something is a contradictive thing on its own through your logic. It is a matter of reason, right? So you already have knowledge about certain things. So if we are born as tabula rasa, right? So I do agree, right? It is hard to absorb data from the outer world if you have zero knowledge about anything if you're born as a little baby. But that is not the case, right? We have knowledge about other things that we already gathered. And so when you're trying to build up new objective knowledge, and when we're trying to put them together, that's where we use logic. And again, we put the data in a way without contradictions, and we understand whether something contradicts or not. For an example, to simplify this, if someone claims that the plate is circle and the plate is square, I wouldn't be able to know that if I didn't know what square and circle were, but I do. I learned it at one point. So I use the previous knowledge I gathered to understand what square and circles are, and I think, well, if something is a square, it cannot really be a circle at the same time. But it can be ceramic and circle at the same time. So I make the conclusion that it is possible for the plate to be a circle and ceramic at the same time, but it is absolutely not possible for it to be a square and circle at the same time. That is how you do it.
But every step of that reasoning has specific assumptions about the internal logic of what you're doing, of the structures you're interacting with, and they're not established within the statement itself, which is my point. Propositional statements internally can't establish truth, and the perception that there is cause and effect being made in a propositional statement in terms of like practical effects in the environment is not actually being established by the statement itself. It's because the proposition symbolically represents a concept that you refer to in your as being associated in your own narrative of reality with the concept that you're projecting onto the proposition. And essentially it's creating a hallucination out of your own perception of cause and effect.
Is what you just said true?
All right, we're going to go to another question on this.
I would say so.
JC Armitage says, doesn't objectivism support quote unquote small government? If so, it's inherently incompatible with libertarianism. So I believe that is to sue.
So that is a very good question. Ayn Rand does support small government. I explained this in my opening statement. There are two different definitions of objectivism. Peikoff, one of Rand's students, defines it as basically support objectivism is a systematic philosophy, and to be able to say you support the philosophy, you have to agree with everything Ayn Rand says. I disagree with the statement. So a huge part of objectivism is that the way to gain knowledge is to use your own independent mind. You cannot really say, I know something, if you just heard it from someone else. You have to be able to evaluate through your own reasoning. So I apply some logic, and I think objectivism is a systematic philosophy that is based on certain metaphysics and epistemology and ethics. And then from there, we make conclusions on how to apply this as a legal theory. And I think Ayn Rand herself contradicted this and had certain ideas on small government, anarchy, and Israel, Palestine, Native Americans, etc. I disagree with her on those kind of topics. But just to clarify, she was aware, I said this in opening statement as well, the contradiction between taxation and objectivist ethics. So at least she made the attempt to remove taxation, where she defined that there should be a small government to make sure we have an, quote unquote, objective law. She claimed the existence of non-objective law would be aggression on its own. But she said this government should be funded purely by donations, not by printing money. She was against that, not by taxation. She was against that. These all should be illegal, and people should just fund this monopoly through donations. Now, I disagree with her. I think the logical conclusion of her statements would be anarchy, because there's basically no way to believe in objectivist ethics and then not defend anarchy. So that's why I call myself an objectivist, but there also would be other people who would exclude me from objectivism. That's why I kind of also identify myself as a rational anarchist in the beginning, but I still don't think the definition would be wrong, to call myself objectivist.
And I would argue, I essentially just wouldn't disagree with your statement if we're referring to, libertarianism being the methodology that anarchism, the philosophy, emerges out of, which we didn't even really get into that, whether or not anarchism can emerge out of political philosophy. Because for the record, I don't consider anarchism and libertarianism to be interchangeable concepts. Anarchism is is an ideology that emerges out of libertarianism as a methodology from my perspective, which is based on specifically agitating and performing behaviors which cause how libertarianism as a methodology characterizes freedom to emerge. And yes, I absolutely agree, Sue. We should end this soon.
Okay. How many more questions do you think we can get to?
I have to go to the bathroom, so probably should probably.
Oh, I mean, you can just hop out if you want to come back. I mean, we can just answer some questions.
I could chat for a bit. That would be probably the most, at least from my perspective, enjoyable part of the stream. I didn't. So what were you gonna say?
Did Esso just throw a shade at me?
No. I'm not upset with anybody. It's just I've been suspecting behind the scenes for a while, because of what I've stated about propositional logic in the stream, that really I'm at the point where I just need to start writing thesis papers, because it's hard to even describe some of these concepts in casual conversation. And this stream confirms to me that I was right. So,
I mean, if you'd like, you can, like I'm saying, you could run to the bathroom and just come back and we can answer just a few more questions before we go. Just because we only got to like 2 of them.
Okay, I'm done.
Sure. Let's see. So, I mean, I assume, Esso, you don't want to get to the same question over and over, because, I mean, there are some from early on that it seems like those were already addressed. I mean, I can flash them if you want, just to see.
I mean, if I already addressed them, then I don't want to repeat myself, because the stream just feels like it was me repeating myself most of the time.
I see. Let's see. I guess I could show some chats just in general. Let's see.
I mean, it wasn't just me repeating myself. It was elaborating on different points. Like, I don't, just to clarify, I don't think that it was just the same, like, it was approaching the same topic, but from, like, different angles of, like, different aspects of what causes it to be defined, like what causes it to emerge as a phenomenon. But yeah, we didn't really make much progress beyond just methodology.
Just as far as chats, Oddities and Rarity said, the problem is that he can only really offer criticism and say what he supports is entirely emergent and not knowable a priori.
Well, it's not that that's a problem. It's that what I'm stating expressly is that there is no a priori truth. It's that what truth is it's not that there is a universal conception of it, but because there isn't a universal conception of truth, that doesn't mean that you can't observe repeatable methods of behavior, repeatable patterns of information that allow you to observe that allow you to create repeatable methods, i.e. science.
Okay, let's see.
That is essentially the closest thing to what you can establish through observing nature to the way that the Socratic method characterizes truth. But truth as a universal isn't it. What I'm saying, I guess, more directly is that it doesn't exist. It's an abstraction caused by the fact that every statement has a definite end.
Oh yeah, this was one from Ignis, and he said it a couple times. He wants to know, what do you think of Hegel?
That's kind of complicated because there are different approaches to understanding Neoplatonism, which is what Hegel's work is based on. And that would require me to get into an entire conversation about my thoughts on Hermeticism, which changed significantly after I started studying MK Ultra. Let me just say that. And I have yet to establish a lot of that in like publicly available content. So I kind of want to hide my power level a bit there because want to make it clear what I base those claims on from a scientific perspective. Because at no point did I become a fucking, no point have I ever become some like new age woo peddler, and I refuse to ever fall in with that crowd. I'm never going to stop being a scientist, but at the same time, like, never going to stop approaching these concepts from the method of a scientist, but at the same time, I don't give a fuck how crazy what the conclusions that I state seem if what I can base them on is valid from a metaphysical perspective.
Okay, so Ignis had a couple questions. I mean, these kind of just go hand in hand, so I'll just show the first one, then show the other two. But he says, doesn't he reject the core tenets of praxeology? And then what he asks is, to Esso, is human action purposeful behavior? Does man implement means towards ends?
I don't reject that. It's just that every man has a different end, so the internal and a different, not just a different end, but a different internal perception of what that is and what pursuing it entails. So what they perceive those means to be and the internal logic between those means and ends is going to be different depending on the person, even if logically speaking, in an abstract sense, that's not the case.
Okay.
I'm back.
Yeah, so Sue's back.
Yeah, human
Just going
action.
through these questions.
Let me clarify. In a logical sense, I meant metaphysical sense. I was being dropped my guard linguistically and let a general slip up through.
Yeah, so I mean, earlier on in the chats, I just kind of skipped past it because you weren't here. But Artemis asked if Sue, what were your thoughts on mysticism and religion? I mean, it should be obvious based on the objectivism part, but sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think they're true. But do you remember we were on that bus to SFL, and like, I'm not going to say her name, but she said there's one thing wrong about objectivism, that it doesn't allow room for Christianity, and my response was based.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't think mysticism explains reality, because I'm eating right now. Sorry, guys. Yeah. It's based on this Platonic idea of supernatural world. So Rand thinks there actually we can reduce philosophy into two major philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, right? Plato, as most of us know, have this idea of the world of Plato's, idea where a reality does exist in this another dimension, and there might not be a way for us to reach it if we reach it. Aristotle, on the other hand, disagrees with him. He thinks that there's only one place for reality, and it's the world that we live in, the objective reality, and we are capable of, absorbing it. Christianity goes to the Platonic side, because where is God? Is he here? Is he something we can understand by the law of identity? Is he something can we understand by the law of non-contradiction? No. So there's not really any space for religion and objectivism, and I think it's like objectively incorrect.
Yeah, and not to get into the basis too intimately of what specifically the I guess will be like what our takes largely on those schools of thought are, but without addressing it, I guess they're not I don't see there being a contradiction between those two perspectives, because from what I've gathered, attempts to describe concepts in spiritual belief systems, to the extent that there are valid phenomena being described, are not literal attempts at trying to describe a phenomenon in nature. Remember what I mentioned earlier in this conversation about thinking about how to formulate your thought process from within the brain as a machine, instead of perceiving your thought process as a direct representation of just what's logically true, and understanding how, based on what, like, within your own perception, what thoughts you're forming, the way your brain reacts to it. Well, basically, spiritual belief systems are a ye old attempt to describe phenomena that can only be interacted with if you approach you're informing your thought processes in auto-hypnotic states in these repeatable methods. And these methods are recreated in the programs, a lot of the programs that anybody can read, that came out of the MK Ultra experiments done in the 60s and 70s, which is where I was able to learn most of this, coupled with the more recent context of large language models training, being trained as far as the algorithms that they're running, like how they create output, being trained off of how neurons are forming, and based on how neurons are forming, being able to create programs that produce copies of memories, essentially, in a digital format. Have you seen this, Sue? Well, the fact that this technical feat was demonstrated means that the way that neurons form in the brain, as far as how the brain works as a machine, is analogous to the way that algorithms in a computer emerge and the way that they run in a computer, which means that the brain and the body, in terms of just mechanically how the mind interfaces with the physical function of the body, is not a digital computer, but is a system that works exactly like one. And putting those two bits of context together is what allowed us to crack that nut. And getting into that is going to take, a lot. And that's mostly what, in the background, we've been trying to figure out. How the fuck to even approach this.
I think this comment might be relevant, at least. It's from Oddities and Rarities. I think she's conflating the language of explaining concepts versus the nature of concepts.
Of explaining concepts versus...
I'm not conflating them. I'm saying that there is an objective nature of concepts, right? And I do think that the linguistic ambiguity that might occur between individuals doesn't change anything to the nature of concepts or whether we can understand that nature of concepts. That's what I was trying to get into.
All right. Let's see. Yeah, there's a lot of chats here. I'm just trying to parse through them. I feel like I might get to the end of it quicker than I think, but I'm still at like 8 o'clock's worth of comments here.
Shh. There's a lot of comments, boy.
Yeah, a lot of people have their own takes on this.
The chat was filled.
Yeah, let's see. Mixed pressure. They're describing two different things. They're not fundamentally two different things. They are two different things.
That was about the circle surrounding conversation.
But that's my point in describing like, if you're going to claim that something is valid scientifically, then that's not the same thing as claiming that something is true from a metaphysical perspective, if inside of a system of thought that assumes universals are valid.
So
honestly, reflecting on this conversation now, I'm sitting here in real time. I'm thinking about this. I'm wondering now whether or not the concept of truth is something that even is valid, or is something that only exists inside of perspectives that assume universals exist. And that's something I'm going to have to reflect on now.
So there are a lot of people asking me if you want Zulu to join the conversation.
The conversation was about over. I mean, no, I'm gonna be very upfront. No, not really. I'm put off, honestly, a bit by like what happened last summer. But I will wholly admit that I'm probably gonna nobody has to care. It's more something that I feel like I'm gonna have to do when I start putting essays up. But I think I'm gonna put out a video trying to explain what the last 2 years were like, because I am very sorry to anybody that I interacted with from summer of 2022 to 2023 that had a negative experience with me. I wasn't behind the scenes it was a fucking, I would go just short of describing what was happening as being a living nightmare. But yeah, I'm not gonna I don't want to get into it here, because, and it's not it's not that I can't defend myself from an intellectual perspective. It's that it has it ties to some stuff that it's hard to talk about casually for me.
Okay.
I was planning on not just addressing, but that video that I was going to be making on my channel, if Zulu or anybody is watching, the extent to which I'm going to be I'll be addressing everything that I'll be addressing everything there. I'm sorry.
So are you aware, because are you self-consciously aware that you use a lot of words?
Yeah, I'm aware of it, but the problem is I'm trying to express something. I'm just trying to work within the conversation, and in real time I'm trying to find the best possible way to frame what I'm trying to present, when what I'm trying to present is not a concept that can be represented propositionally. So I have to kind of game the way that language works to show people concepts that exist outside of propositional logic within propositional statements. It's like there's fucking mental war games going on over here. Sometimes I don't, and sometimes it comes out a little disorganized, and I'm sorry for that.
No, it's okay. You don't have to apologize to me about that.
So okay, there's a difference. Sandman. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, Sandman asked, does existence exist?
Yes, it does. Existence does exist.
Well, because there is something that can be observed that we know exists before perception, then yes, things exist outside of perception. But meaning does not exist until it is perceived. Meaning is a process that is created out of perception, and perception doesn't inherently exist.
How do you know that?
How do I know that? Because it's not possible to how do I know what specific what are you asking about?
How do you know that existence exists independent of human consciousness?
Because of the fact that in order for perception to exist, something has to exist before perception, and we know what it is. It's information, and what information is patterns and physical structures.
Is this a true statement?
In terms of it being a statement which, within my internal reasoning, accurately reflects what I am claiming to be the nature of what I can observe, yes.
Is the true statement that you're internally accurately proclaimed it?
Is it an internally accurate statement? Yes.
Is that not a proposition?
It's not a proposition because there's no point at which that reasoning begins with an axiom.
What is the axiom when you say the sky is blue?
It would be within that specific statement the concept that is being referred to as blue.
Are you aware of
And
like Aristotle's categories? Have you read about it?
what was that? I
Have
just
you read about
genuinely didn't
Aristotle's
hear what you said.
categories? Have you read about Aristotle's categories? I'm asking because it's relevant to this.
I have not off the top of my head.
Okay, right. So the way he categorizes is different than how we define
Categories. Categories.
Yes.
Yes. I thought you said fucking. My mind is on Easter. I thought you said Cadbury's, like Cadbury eggs. Sorry. Yes, I am familiar with categories in Aristotelian philosophy.
There's a subject and there's something that impacts it, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So in here, right, you're the subject, and the thing that impacts you, like this thing that wouldn't exist without you, is the concept that the true proposition, like you using. Well, it wouldn't exactly be the true proposition. What I'm trying to say is that you making propositions would be a part of your categorization, your predicament, right?
Every single part of that statement, why is the thing that is being practically referred to in the context of what the concept is being projected onto, why does it refer to that thing necessarily?
It
within
refers,
the
so in here, you're making a claim that I know I'm correct because I internally, it all comes down to I know I'm correct because I internally decided that I'm correct.
No, it's, I know that it's valid because of the fact that I can observe a repeatable method that exists whether or not I do, based on what I'm putting forward.
Okay, can you repeatedly observe that the sky is blue?
What are we referring to as blue in that statement? Why is it the sky? That's the problem with propositional statements. Like the concept we're referring to as sky and the concept we're referring to as blue are only referring to the things they do in the environment, because that's what's necessary for the statement to be perceived as valid. But the same statement could refer to anything else in any other teleological relationship, and whether or not it's valid still stand.
No, you have a false understanding of objects and things and predicaments, and I think your whole issue comes down to this false understanding, right? So in the sense of the sky is blue, there's nothing that makes it possible for sky being blue without the sky. So it's conditional that the sky has the color of blue as long as there's a sky there. So first we have to focus on the fact that is there a sky, right?
Yeah, it's
so
that in that internal
sky,
reasoning, yes, that's valid. That's valid because the concept of sky.
Is not internal reasoning. This is literally
It's valid.
Concepts that exists, right? It exists outside of our perception. Right?
It follows.
And individuals, right, can look at things and see them and understand what they are and define them. And we define them like there's a linguistic connection there. We define them on how we conceptualize them. And then we build little words. And then we build other words, such as the word blue. We say, oh, these things have this specific color, therefore it's blue. And then we look at the sky and it's like, oh, the sky carries this. It is the predicament of it. Therefore, the sky is blue. And you're making statements of like, you're basically using word salads in the end of the day to await the internal problem that your propositions are not that different from the proposition that the sky is blue.
I'm not putting forward propositions though. Like the only reason within the internal reasoning of that claim that it has to follow that there is a practical reference in the environment we could associate with the sky is because we're just presupposing that the concept of the sky in that statement has these phenomenological characteristics we're associating with it. But that doesn't mean metaphysically that we agree on the nature of what the sky is. And it also doesn't mean that the statement has demonstrated a truth. It just means that if we use it to represent this reasoning, then it represents something that can exist. But if it represents something that is invalid, then it just shows nonsense. That's essentially what propositional statements are.
How can you make claims, right? Okay, you say mine is not a propositional statement because mine are not based on axioms. You literally just acknowledge an axiom, which is an axiom of, existence. Therefore, every statement you make has to include this axiom. It is simply impossible at this point, once you concede to the fact that axiom of existence exists, to make a statement that is not axiomatic in that sense. Because everything you say comes from the background that there is an existence there.
But I explained why it's possible to perceive meaning, i.e. what I'm claiming all narratives of reality emerge out of. And I don't need to base this on an axiom. I explained exactly how this emerges. Perception exists because we have sense organs that are constantly looking for signals. There's a physical environment that has structures that are held together by patterns. We can observe repeatable patterns in the structures, and we know that the structures exist independent of our perception because they have to exist in order for us to be able for our sense organs to receive any input. No part of that statement rests on the assumption an axiom exists. There's no initial.
Not objective. Why is perception not objective?
Perception isn't objective because because meaning informs what you perceive deduction to be, which means that every single person's perception of meaning is different because meaning is created at the point where meaning is something that emerges within every single person's instance of what they are perceiving. There's a mechanical process here that's taking place that's being conflated with logical truth.
If a plate is circle, right? If it has the shape, let's forget about the word circle, right? It has the shape, that circle shape that we can visually think. Forget the word and visualize it. There are two individuals. They're looking at the plate. You already admitted that the plate's shape exists objectively regardless of their perception.
No, now, I said that.
You already agreed that it exists. Are you denying that if I put a plate, its shape just stays that way, regardless how we perceive it or not?
I'm disagreeing that perception has some sort of necessary connection to how something is being sensed and how something works within the practical reasoning of the environment, because the practical reasoning of the environment, how we act on it and how it's influenced, is essentially just
the plate is on the kitchen table. Okay, I'm there, someone else is there. Okay, you're there and I'm there. The plate is on the kitchen table.
Yeah.
We both look at the same plate? Is there any possible way that we look at the plate, the same plate, and we see different things?
Yes, because not every person has the same narrative of reality. That's exactly the point that I'm getting at. And because of this, you can
How?
observe two
Possible.
people can observe that something has the exact same characteristics, can process the exact same line of reasoning as one another propositionally, and come to two entirely different conclusions.
But that doesn't change how we see the plate. So here's the thing. Let's the plate is there, and we both look at it, and we both might have different words for the shape of plate. I might use the word round, and you might use a different complete word. Maybe we speak different languages. But in the end of the day, there is simply no possible way for us to see different shapes when we look at the plate. We might have different experiences about the plate. We might come to different conclusions about whether the plate is good or not, but I also believe something objective about it, but let's put that aside. But at the end of the day, it is technically biologically impossible that we are both human and we possess eyes and we look at the plate and we don't see the same exact thing and we don't describe it in the same way. And when I say in the same way, I mean like meaning the same way. You can use different words, as I said.
All right. And I explicitly stated earlier, I'm not claiming that the physical nature of the pattern that is being described changes depending on how one approaches it in their own narrative of reality. What I'm pointing out is that the implications of every person having a different narrative of reality means that deduction itself is not perceived the same way.
They don't have a different narrative. They see the same thing. It's round. They all see that it's round. They all acknowledge that it's round unless they're visually impaired.
But what does that mean to them? If what it means to them isn't going to be the same, then there can't be something that is universally true.
Unless they define the word round. Let's say I'm from a different tribe, and in my tribe, round is described as square. Unless there's a situation like that, right? That is a linguistic ambiguity. But that even isn't relevant to this conversation.
Okay, but I'm not relying on.
It doesn't matter what does the word round means. We both see it's round. Now,
yeah,
it might differ in the sense where I think, oh, it's easier and better to eat on a round plate, and the other person's like, I hate the shape round, right? We might have different perceptions about that, but these different perceptions, in the end of the day, doesn't change the objective proposition that the plate is round. The proposition is correct. The perception doesn't change that. The proposition can still be sensed by humans objectively at the same time, at the same place with different humans as part of them being biologically humans.
If what every single concept in that statement is representing a metaphysical system that accurately represents the nature of something which could be observed, yes. But whether or not a propositional statement does is not relevant, and what it means to the person that is perceiving it is going to be informed by what they already believed going into perceiving it.
Yeah, but propositions are just meanings in languages that conveys information about the world. So, right, we humans have the capacity to identify what a circle is. Okay, we biologically are capable of it. We have a thing called brain. And most of us have eyes, like a vast majority of us have eyes, and they're functioning. So we can look the thing that's supposed to be the shape of a circle, and we can make a proposition, right? We're basically building a basic unit of meaning out of what we see. And then we look at the plate, and we can just say, oh, this looks like a circle, therefore this plate is circled. I build a proposition. The assertion, I claim that my assertion is true, and I claim biologically it can be true because I observed it and I used the law of non-contradiction and the law of identity to understand it.
Okay, but if we're representing all of those concepts as propositions, then in order for them to meet the statement exists whether or not it represents those concepts, and within propositional logic is valid either way, regardless of how it's expressed, because because propositional logic is treating this as though the expression of the formula is what defines the phenomenon that's being observed and allows it to be observed and allows you to know that it's true. But what I'm pointing out is that in order for any statement, regardless of whether or not it's propositional, to even mean anything independent of how you perceive your own environment, you need to refer to concepts that exist whether or not you do, patterns of information, because that's the only thing that you can prove exists before your perception does.
Yes, and this is a proposition that you made because you observed the world.
It's not a no. It's not
the proposition. You observed the world, and you said, "Oh, this." I use my logic to make a meaning in language.
It's
that
not
I
a proposition
about the world, and you conveyed an information about the world, and this is what you think it is, but it is false. But in the end
it's
of
not
the day,
a proposition because my claim is based on the fact that you can observe physical patterns, and physical patterns need to exist in order for this process to take place. That's not a proposition because that's based on the fact that there is a physical system that is repeatable.
You have a truth value. You're making a truth value. Therefore, it's a proposition. Okay.
That's not a proposition because it's not an axiom.
Okay, listen. A proposition is a statement you make, right? That is expresses information about the world, right? Some symbols can be propositions. Mathematical equations can be propositions. The linguistics expressions that have truth values can be propositions. What cannot be propositions are questions and comments.
If meaning needs perception to exist, then it means truth can only exist if perception exists, and these physical patterns exist whether or not perception exists. Therefore, things can exist whether or not universal perception of truth exists.
Where do you come with the idea that propositions themselves have to be axioms?
Because of the fact that they're tying fundamentally the practical expression of phenomenon in the environment to metaphysical statements. And what I've been stating throughout the entire stream is that when you do that, there's a hidden teleology in your reasoning that is that is creating your perception of the logical relationship between concepts and subjects. And what's actually happening when you're putting forward a propositional statement is you're projecting that onto the propositions if the statement is attempting to represent a literal truth, which is why it appears to represent a literal truth.
Every proposition, in my sense, does have an inherent axiom to it, right? Which is that axiom is that the fact that existence exists. I think that proposition, we wouldn't be able to make any propositions if existence didn't exist. But this doesn't mean propositions are axioms, or they necessarily have to contain axioms.
And if existence existed because existence exists, then every part of existence could just be existingly described. You see what I'm getting at? You need to be able to refer to something other than just the statement itself in order for what you're describing to mean anything.
Yeah, okay, existence exists because anything else would be a contradiction.
So something we call existence exists, and the reason we know this is because it creates something called a contradiction within the internal reasoning of that statement.
For you to be able to say existence exists, right? For you to be able to claim that existence doesn't exist, or at one point it didn't exist, you have to acknowledge the concept of existence, right? So what I'm trying to say in here is that existence doesn't need a causation, but causation needs an existence. Existence doesn't need the concept of non-existence, but the concept of non-existence needs existence. You cannot simply not have the concept of non-existence. Existence had to exist. So this is what this. It's actually
existence is a self-reference.
Okay.
Internally, it's something that you can use to refer to a concept that exists within your own perception. But saying existence exists, it's kind of like asking a question like, why are things the way they are?
I mean, it is just correct. I mean, if not for it, there couldn't be a concept of consciousness. It's just contradictory. It's just by definition, you cannot say existence doesn't exist. It has to exist.
But if the basis of our claim,
nothing to be conscious of is a contradiction.
But if the basis of our claim is just existence has to be because we're observing repeatable patterns, then that doesn't meaningfully describe anything. It doesn't create a system of logic. It just allows you to... It doesn't. It just allows you to say that things exist. And it allows you to base every...
All right, hold on. I'd like to take a chat from Zulu because... Oh, wait, hold on. Sorry, wrong one. He actually has a decent comment here that I guess could be addressed in so far as getting to the root of this argument or getting to a solution here. He says, existence exists just means that that which is, that which is not.
And why are we perceiving what quote-unquote is as being what is? And why are we perceiving what quote-unquote is not as being what is not?
Because otherwise it would be a contradiction. Because a conscious with nothing to be
But how do you know that?
Because a conscious with nothing to be conscious of is a contradiction in terms.
So, but this is an argument internally as a reminder, justifying why existence is a valid concept, and now we're making value judgments about behavior.
We're making truth judgments, right? We are making truth propositions about existence that we derived from using the law of non-contradiction.
But that isn't something that was derived by an observation about nature. That is a hallucination created by the fact that these concepts as propositions are representing a repeatable pattern that is valid, but only if we're projecting this onto if we're using the statement itself to represent this. That's the problem. Propositional statements are representations. They don't create meaning. Perception creates meaning.
Yes, they don't. Yeah, propositional statements do not really create meaning in a sense of creating. They build knowledge, right? So in here, existence is an axiom. And how I know is an axiom, right? Yes, you are right. I observe things about the world. And the law of contradiction is a knowledge I gained also through observation and understanding reality. And I use this concept of law of contradiction as a way to understand that existence exists.
But, and now we just keep going in circles because I don't know how to... I don't know how else I could explain this, because you're putting forward, you're saying that the propositions are what's demonstrating this. And what I keep pointing out is that it's not. It's the fact that we can refer to something that exists, whether or not this entire conversation exists, and we know that because of the fact that what caused it to be could happen, whether or not our internal logic is valid. And yeah,
what I'm trying to say is that in the end of the day, if
this just keeps being reframed as a proposition, and it's not.
If we both and
Right.
It is a proposition. If we both
It's
apply
not.
the law
I'm just gonna-
of non-contradiction, we would come to the same conclusions. There's
I'm
no
just gonna put this up
internal
from Zulu because he reposted the question. He said, I guess he wants it addressed by Esso, but I mean, you know, Esso would probably say he already addressed it, but we'll see it. Question for Esso: given you cannot make any truth claims, no propositions, how do you hope to flow through and thus win the debate as stated?
I literally stated from the start that I was not intending to look at this conversation as a debate. I was looking at this as discourse exercise and also an opportunity to reach out and talk with people, because I kind of haven't been in like the last 2 months.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you want to get to the actual, because, well, I mean, basically, you know, outside of what he's trying to prove as a statement here, there's given
but
you
as
not
far
making truth claims,
as
like, how do you hope to like make your case, basically?
But yeah, as far as what I've been describing for the last hour, it is how you would make observations about nature independent of a propositional framework. And I suppose that I could flesh out how I would be demonstrating this when I'm writing formal proof of it, but this isn't exactly like talking about it in this format isn't exactly the approach I was going to be taking to writing a fucking essay. So
all right, well,
you don't have to worry about it.
Okay,
about that.
It's 9 p.m. It's been 3 hours. Like,
yeah,
that's what I was gonna say too. I was gonna let you guys wrap up after this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was
I mean, basically, insane. Look, I'll just give it to you guys. Like, you know, each of you can give your statement as far as if you want to promote anything else other than what was stated on here already, or if you really just want to reiterate where you can be followed. I mean, if you really have any quick points you want to make, I know we want to get out of here. So pretty much, you know, I'll throw it to Sue and then Esso.
Yeah, okay. I'm not going to make a closing statement because I already made it and everyone already listened to it. Just, I'm going to shill for my Twitter account. This is Sue. And it's going down right now. What's the English word for that? The symbol. The
handle or the underscore? Oh, you mean the underscore?
Yeah. It's my Twitter account is this is Sue _ Follow me. And if you want to learn about objectivism, please follow my Twitter account. I talk about objectivism there, and you can DM me.
All right. Esso?
And I'm Esso. I would not even consider setting up a Twitter account at this point because it exists for the purpose of turning you into a demon that hates everyone other than the government.
You're live on there right now.
Hey, everybody. But if anybody wants access to the Backalley Discord server, just DM either I or Filthy Heretic on Discord. That's currently the best way to get a hold of us. That is not like exclusively how we're planning on coordinating going forward. We're just kind of in a weird phase of simultaneously writing a bunch of content to exist independent of the channel, but also reorganizing the channel. So before we start like really putting out content again, it's kind of hard to describe what's going on, but we'll just be brief and say there's some reorganization happening.
So is it the proposition that Twitter turns you into a demon?
It causes you to develop a parasocial sense of trust, and it makes you it makes everybody hate each other. So
all right. Well then, with that being said, you can find me at Civil Offense on social media. Right. I mean, you know, we'll probably have another live stream sometime soon. I mean, you know, not necessarily you two on there. Just you're welcome back, both of you. But we'll be back sometime soon. DM me at anarcho-nitrain on Discord for access to the Discord server, and you'll be able to see all the latest updates. But if not, you can go to ahmedmlih.com, sign up for my email list. I actually, like I said, I will start sending the updates. Okay, I will get back on that. But yeah, guys, remember that civil offense is the key to winning. Thank you.
Bye-bye.